team up here in Cairns, far north Queensland. With me this evening is Bill Bates, head coordinator of the Booberism campaign. Good evening, Bill.
Good evening, David.
Good evening. And our special guest for this evening, ladies and gentlemen, is Chris Squelch. Now, Chris Squelch is a North Queensland local, lives in the Townsville area. He's an ex-RAAF serviceman and has been all around the great country of ours as well as in the Queensland state. And he's done a degree in Nautical Science at UTAS, and specialised in food logistics, and has spent many years in the transport industry working in that field as a manager. He felt the need to give something back and then did a Master's in Health and part of a Batchelor of Psychology. And I think up until now, correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, but you still work with predominantly men and Aboriginal men, and you have been for at least 20 years now. Is that correct?
Yes, up until last year, I worked in this field, but I've become semi-retired at this point.
Oh, mate, well, congratulations for your retirement, mate. Well earned, and especially with the varying industries you've touched in your lifetime, mate. It's lots of experiences there, I can imagine.
Well, there's a possibility, of course, of giving a bit more back with my experience in food and agriculture, and a personal interest in water conservation.
Well, great way to put it into tonight's discussion, which we predominantly wanted to get your views on and your opinions on the North Queensland state of things when it comes to water, because although you have this background in both farming and transport and logistics as well as mental health, you seem to have a bit of a pet love and hobby of assessing North Queensland's agricultural capacity for water retention, and you are very well informed about the current situation of things when it comes to the dams up here, mate. Do you want to elaborate on how you came about to find unrequited love with that sort of a hobby?
It's always actually been a hobby.
Oh, there we go.
Driving around, looking at land, looking at farms, talking to farmers, seeing what people are doing, how they're doing it, what they're growing, what the yields are, and how they're getting them. Agriculture has always basically been a background hobby with me all my life.
Well, why not? Because it is the backbone of the area when it comes to central and north Queensland. If it's not cane, if it's not grazing, it's generally anything to do with one of those two branching off. And mining obviously requires lots of water as well. So, do you want to let us know a little bit about?
And of course,
sorry.
And water, of course, is a strategic input.
Well, of course, because obviously. I could still remember one of the first things learning about castles is they were only so good as much as the water supply was, because back in the medieval times you could have the best, thickest walls in the world, but it wouldn't matter if you didn't have a lot of water.
You ran out of water, you had it.
Yes, yeah. I guess the infidels or the whatnot at the gates would have eventually got in because you had to open them, eh?
Did you see that picture that I sent? Or it's a short video of the Burdigan Falls Dam in flood the year before last?
I don't know if I did myself, sorry, Chris, no, but I remember seeing photos of the Burdigan Dam.
Yeah, I sent it to Bill.
Yeah, okay, I'll have to make sure I try and get that off Bill, but obviously it's nowhere near that sort of if it was in full flood when you took those photos, it's not that state at the moment, is it?
Oh no, it's only 80% full at the moment.
Well, and look, Chris, you are in the Townsville area as well. Do you want to tell us about how even in the last couple of years the Townsville water supply was in dire straits? Because I believe it went down to single digits there at one point, didn't it?
The water supply, the Townsville City water supply, went down to I think we're knocking on level 4 restrictions. And then the year before last, we got that massive wet season, and of course there was water everywhere.
Well,
more water.
Yes, and the flooding that ensued. Yes.
Well, the Ross River Dam here at Townsville, it filled up to about 250% or 300% or something. And yes, I was looking at that and I was thinking, well, it's only an earth dam. I was starting to get a bit worried actually, but. A lot of the Townsville City was actually flooded, and it cost a fortune. But well, we're not necessarily talking about the Ross River Dam. We're talking about the Vertigan Falls Dam, which is basically a half-finished work in progress. It was a great dam, and it was a great design. And a matter of fact, it was finished all except the 14.6 metre high floodgates in that big gap right in the middle, 800 metre gap in the middle. Now, those floodgates would increase the size of the lake behind the dam from 1,800 million or 1.8 million megalitres of water. The floodgates would increase the size of the lake to around about 6.5 million megalitres of water. Now, the photo that I sent to Bill shows the Vertigan Falls Dam in flood, and it's worth seeing. Believe me, it's literally an earth-shaking experience. You stand next to it, and the earth shakes with the water going over that dam.
Yes, it is quite. It's quite a wide causeway, isn't it? So.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
You've got 6 or 8 metres of water going over that. Now that works out to around about over about a 5-day period. Even with a moderate flood, it works out to around about 3 million extra megalitres just go straight over that dam wall and out to sea.
Yes, and it's an incredible sight. I can't wait to, if Bill would be so kind as to forward that on to me. I look forward to seeing that, because I actually just myself quickly being the way that the modern world is, I quickly looked up the Vertigan Falls Dam and went straight to the Sunwater website, and it tells me it's at 75% capacity, and obviously has a couple of images. And it has that information you outlaid. But listen, the Vertigan Falls Dam, and as amazing as it is a feat of engineering, as well as a very important water resource.
As I said, David, this is a half-finished feat of engineering.
Yeah,
for 30 years it has sat there now without the floodgates.
Wow.
Now, those floodgates, on average, would pass around about a minimum sort of average. Some years it'll do a lot more than this. That's around 3 million extra megalitres of water that just goes straight out to sea. Now, I'll tell you what, that from an economic point of view, that translates into, for instance, if we grew cotton, that would it takes 7.8 megalitres of water per hectare to grow a crop of cotton, an irrigated crop of cotton. Now that's about 400,000 extra hectares of irrigated country.
And cotton itself is one of the more thirsty of the crops that you can decide to plant on your land, isn't it? As well, from what I understand. So that's a very conservative way to be able to really display how much more land could be cultivated by the use of this excess water that's not being retained. And what's your thoughts then, Chris? On we could talk all night about the political back and forth and why this dam hasn't continued on its development. But why do you think it's taken so long?
That's why I'm going to. Yeah. So that's why I'm concentrating almost entirely on the economic side of it.
Yeah.
The money we're losing. Now that 3 million extra megalitres of water translates into around about 400,000 hectares of cotton at 10 to 15 bales per hectare. That's around $2.20 per kilogram, 227 kilograms in a bale. We're looking at a loss of around about $5,000 a hectare per year. You multiply that by 400,000. Looking at $2 billion.
Yeah, and look, Chris, it's easy to crunch those numbers like you've just displayed when it comes to the actual product at the end of the line. But I mean, as they like to say these days, whenever anyone talks about a cost analysis and the politicians talk about it, is you can't help but then include, well, what about the ramifications of secondary and third line of jobs that are created through the supply of that agricultural land.
Exactly.
You know, there's the supply of the irrigation.
Economics.
Yeah, it's not just the dam itself. You need to be able to then get the water to the land that's going to be cultivated, and all the jobs and requirements ensued.
Well, out of that $5,000 per hectare that cotton is going to generate, the farmer's going to make probably about $1,500 a hectare out of that. The other $3,500 per hectare will go to the agriculture, the farm machinery people. It will go to parts and spare parts, fertiliser, electricity for pumping water, the cost of water itself, and then that's the first layer of people. Then there are secondary layers of people. You've got the farmer himself and his family, and all the people that work on the farm are going to buy food, clothing, housing. This is the economy, layer on layer of economy.
Well, and
now,
that could essentially lead to a revitalisation of the local communities around the Burdekin. Sorry, continue.
Exactly.
Oops. Are you there, Chris? Sorry.
Unless you're generating revenue,
yep,
you don't have an economy.
Well, exactly, yes.
The economy is everything. It's what everybody is buying and selling let's take the Burdekin area. It's what everyone's buying and selling within the Burdekin area. And outside of that, because you've got banking, you've got insurance, you've got transport, you've got people right to Melbourne who are making money out of the Burdekin.
Yes, but it's
now, if you're not,
it's
you're
easy
not
to see a big
generating
picture,
that
but
money,
that's not necessarily
it's not
how the
man-made, is
political
it?
wheels. Yes, the political wheels don't necessarily see the oil that could be there for them, do they?
Well, obviously not in this case, because the Queensland government hates building dams, and they're busily knocking one down at the moment.
Well,
that's because they build it poorly.
The Paradise Dam has been. And you know, there was a number of engineering companies who said, yes, we can fix this. You don't have to knock it down.
Wow.
I was speaking to a couple of engineers the other day about it, and it's a dam which is made out of grouted cement with sand, gravel, and rock, grouted and rolled and in a big layer, back and forth.
Yep.
You know, what's happened is, at some point in construction, probably on a weekend, they've stopped laying concrete and stopped doing work on it, and the dam wall has become stratified. So it's made up of strata now.
Mm-hmm.
Now the problem with that is the pressure of the water pushing on the dam wall has tended to force the strata to slide laterally with each other. You know, the simple way of that, of course, is to peg the strata together by drilling multiple pile shafts in the top of the dam, straight down into the bedrock, and anchoring all of the strata together and stopping them sliding. But the Queensland government, with their obvious hatred of, well, it's not so much a hatred of dams, it's a hatred of farming.
Infinite wisdom is what it can be summarised as, Chris.
They hate farming, and they hate farming because of a number of reasons. The same reason they hate family businesses, because they are basically the status quo. And socialists, the whole aim of socialists is to destroy the status quo and rebuild the socialist nirvana on the ashes of the status quo. Now, I've got bad news for you. You and I, we're the status quo.
Well, they're happy to employ.
So it'll be your ashes.
Yeah, and
your ashes and my ashes on which it'll be built.
Well, that's correct, and the private sector and small business and the employment and the revenue that's created from it is what supplies the revenue to employ public servants, and they're happy to put on more public servants and not reward the private sector to be able to continue doing that. And it's just a vicious cycle. They do not see the simplistic way that they just need to get out of the way. And
I've worked in the public service. When it was really good. I remember back in 89, 90, I did a consultancy job for Department of Primary Industry, entitled the Transportation of North Queensland Perishables, a situation analysis. I did that with a very fine economist called Peter Hamilton. And back in those days, there were some brilliant people worked in that department. And it was a joy to work with them, basically. So you get around a table at lunchtime and you'd have all this stuff all ideas being chucked about. And there were people who actually knew what they were talking about. But I think back then there were 5,000 people employed by DPI, and a few years after I left, after the Labor Party gained control, I think with, I can't recall which premier it was, but he fired everybody basically, and it dropped to 500 people in the state.
Wow, the DPI at one point just before the 90s, you're saying the DPI was like 500 people or so, like.
Yes, yeah. This was who was that guy? Who was the first Labor premier after? No, not Beattie. The one before him, Wayne Goss.
Yeah, Goss.
Yeah, Wayne Goss, I think it was. Yeah, everybody got fired. And I mean, it's just a ludicrous business. Mm. You're firing the people, the best government brains were fired in the biggest industry, the biggest revenue producer in the state, apart from mining and agriculture.
Reminds me of the kulaks.
Well, that's the idea.
Yeah,
they use the peasants to kill.
They use the peasants to kill the actual successful agricultural families, and then the greatest famine of communist history ensued afterwards because no one knew all the knowledge and whatnot that they took with them.
And the ones that weren't killed, they put them on trains, 7 million of them, and took them out to the desert of Kazakhstan and dumped them there.
Yes, look, we could talk all night about that, and it's good to be able to laugh that things aren't that bad, but it's the same but different in lots of different ways, because I guess when you have a department that might be honing down on the agricultural industry, and let's face it, most farms are still small business, especially in central and north Queensland, family owned, multi-generational. They're just there to do what they've always done. And as long as and we're already renowned for having best practice for lots of different industries when it comes to runoff, when it comes to water retention itself, even without the extra capacity of dams, you just need to get out of the way and let farmers be farmers and provide money to the government coffers, don't they?
Well, you just think about this. Irrigation water in the vertical, it's going to cost me money.
Yeah.
$42 a megalitre. Why am I going to put too much water on my paddock so that it all runs off into the drainage ditches and out and down the creek? If I've got to pay it, I've got to pay for it.
That's exactly
I'm
right.
Not anyway, unless I'm a complete fool.
No.
Why am I going to load the paddock up with 10 times as much fertiliser, which costs a fortune, if I don't need to? I'm going to put the bare minimum fertiliser on that paddock that's going to do the job. It's going to either grow me cane or whatever it is I'm growing. I'm going to put the bare minimum fertiliser on it that's going to get me that 40 tonnes of cane per hectare or 8 tonnes per hectare of rice. That's all I'm putting on. I'm not putting on any extra.
Well, that's exactly right, and I guess
unless I've gone off my head.
Well, no, that's the point. I guess that's where it gets different, is because now I believe, and I can assure you that I believe DPI would be significantly more than 500 people these days. That there's so many people involved. You know better than me, of course, Chris, but there's so many people involved in this process that they lose sight of the fact that farmers are still businessmen as well. And it's like, listen here, guys, you can worry about the Great Barrier Reef, you can worry about all of that, but I'm not putting more water on my crops than's needed, creating more runoff.
No.
Yeah.
And I'm not putting any more fertiliser on than I have to pay for.
Exactly.
I think
anything else is a straight up loss.
Yes, exactly.
I think there's another thing coming out too, is this nanotechnology. My brother-in-law is in the turf business, and he recently went over to the US and looked at this nano fertiliser. And I believe that the actual reduction in usage of fertiliser is huge, and the movement of the fertiliser from where it's actually applied is almost negligible. It doesn't sort of disappear, and this is the way where the industry has developed these products simply because they don't want to waste or damage waste resources, which is the fertiliser, and then damage the environment. So these industries, through their, for the people who use the product, are developing things much faster and better than the government can even think. And these nano fertilisers are going to be game changing.
That's right. And the problem we've got now is everybody who actually knew what this was all about has got the axe and the DPI. They're gone. All the experts, all the people that I used to be there with 20, 30 years ago, these sort of people are gone. And now you've got a whole how would I put it without being insulting? They're
highly educated, but no practical application, and still think they're going around with superphosphate.
You remember when you went to school, they'd have a class for the ones who sort of weren't going to really aspire to much, and it was called social maths or social English or social something or other. Well, most of those people in DPI now, they're social agriculturalists.
But never been on a farm.
No.
Yet they're happy to turn up and tell you how to do it, though, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah, they know everything. They know everything about environmentalism and ecological disasters and all the rest of it, without actually realising that that's not actually occurring here at all.
Well, Chris, it's a shame. And look, we've even spoken to a fellow farmer like yourself that lived up in Lakeland, and he told us a few stories that were spine chingling, mate. Like, the involvement of the involvement of the bureaucratic process in just trying to make some pumpkins come out the ground, and trying to build a dam on his own property, just to be able to water in those 3 or 4 dry months that he required, was an absolute bureaucratic nightmare. And it was even met with a solution of, I guess there's no other way to say it, Chris, socialist tendencies of, kowtowing it to the local Indigenous community, which is their involvement is important as well, I must admit, and to a certain degree. But it was basically a bribe of forms to get the local communities involved up in the Cape to come down. It was going to cost him $200,000 or $300,000 in flights, get all these elders to come down, have their input, and then be able to build the dam anyway, which would have cost less. So
most of this.
He just threw the whole idea out.
And that's another thing. I've worked with Aborigines for many years, and a lot of them have just simply given up, because it's why waste your time? I mean, you try and do something, and the government will come out and bureaucratise you to death. You own a huge amount. 15% of Australia is owned by Aborigines, and you own all this country, but you can't actually do anything with it. Like, up the Cape, for instance, they've decided they've got this green idea of the wild rivers. Well, those wild rivers, they only flow for about 4 months to 5 months of the year. The rest of the time, there's a big wide sandy bed. There's nothing in it at all. Now, if you put dams up the top end, or near the 2/3 the way up the river, on Mitchell, Gilbert, and a few of those other rivers up there in the West Cape, you would have a river flowing all year. And downstream, where most of the best topsoil has been washed for the last million years, those Aboriginal communities like Arakoon and all the rest of it, they could farm down there. There's I've seen some massive areas that could be farmed.
And that's part of the reason why they're so inept in dealing in the actual the problems and the consequences of why the problems exist in the first place, especially when you talk about communities like Arakoon. This is my opinion, of course. It's like, I mean, you're constantly hearing about there's troubles that are occurring in Arakoon with the local population and the discontent, or
they have nothing to do.
And exactly right. Give them opportunity. Give them the ability to say, listen, go out, till the land, and you guys might actually make a good coin. And instead of just hanging around and wanting to, burn down the local station at the taxpayer's expense once every couple of years, how about you have some productive use of your time and actually feel rewarded in that, instead of the government coming in to coddle you and deal with you in the way that they've always done for the last couple of decades. It's just absurd.
A lot of people a lot of people are against the old mission system, but I'll tell you something. The old Christian Inland Mission, there was the Anglican Mission to Aborigines around the Gulf, Roper River and Groot Island and around the Gulf country. On those missions, and including places like Doomadgee and a lot of Arakan, Presbyterians and everywhere, do you know that every single person on those missions had a job? Every single person could speak English and read and write English. And just about nearly every single male member of the community at least had an apprenticeship of some description, whether it was woodworking, building houses, brickwork, even to the point of running fishing boats and all sorts of stuff like that. But as soon as the government took over and Gough Whitlam collectivised the Aborigines in Northern Australia, all of that went.
Yeah, and look, it's just an example of having a community that's got everybody has their role to play, and you know, you could say what you want about the fact that you could say what you want about the fact that the missionaries were involved, but they did their good, because I know many stories of the missionaries and operated the same fashion up in Papua New Guinea, and they did their role and they did it perfectly, and the local community thrived in that manner that you've just described. And I guess you deal with the onset of it now, having dealt with Aboriginal men for the last 20 years in your profession as a psychologist before you've retired. You would see it from a day-to-day basis, wouldn't you? The lack of the lack of opportunity probably stemming into the fact that they have all the social issues that they have in those local communities now. Would you agree?
Absolutely. It's a sense of hopelessness.
Yes, that's sad.
They've lost hope. And I mean, it is really sad. I see men there who are quite capable, and when they are given the opportunity, like one of the programs that I ran in Kununurra in the Kimberley in Western Australia, this old bloke came and saw me one day, and his name was John Nelson. He was such a terrific guy, Aboriginal man, from down in Merredin in Western Australia. And he came and saw me and said, "I've heard a fair bit about you, and I want to work for you." I said, "What do you want to do?" And he said, "Here's who I am for a start." And he had a big manila folder of all the accolades that he had achieved, even a letter of commendation from the Prime Minister at one point. And he hands me all this. And I said, "Okay, so what are we going to do?" And he says, "I need you to buy this for me." And it was sand, gravel, wheelbarrows, shovels, cement, gravel. And I said, "What are you doing?" "Going into the concreting business." He says, "Exactly, you watch." So they started off doing edgings around the gardens and stuff like that, and improved all that. Then they did paths, and they were laying steel, doing steel fixing and stuff, and then he showed them how to all do that, how to do the formwork. Then they did driveways, and then they moved from that to building houses.
It's incredible, and all that's required is for these local communities to be given their chance to thrive and opportunity. Exactly.
Given an opportunity. Well, given an opportunity, and the young men. There was a young man when they were building one of these houses. He's still there leaning on his shovel, and I'll jump back a bit. I went and saw them when they were doing the driveway. I said, "Now, who are you guys?" And one of them said, "We're concreters." Now, that's very important for any man to be able to identify himself by his work. Now, it's a fat lot of good saying, "Yeah, I'm a drunk and I lie under a tree every day and horse about. That's all I do."
Correct. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Every single one, you identify yourself by what you do. I do too. Everybody does, and including Aboriginal men. Now, they used to be able to say, I'm a warrior, a protector of the tribe, and a man of the Kalkadoon people or whatever, and or Yunwi people. But they can't do that now because that's all been taken away. Now, but they do need to be able to say, I'm a diesel fitter, or I'm a mechanic, I'm a concreter, I'm a chippy, I'm a builder. I identify myself by this. Now, these guys, when I went and saw them when they were laying the pathway, the driveway, they stood up strong and said, we're concreters. about a month later, I went and saw them when they're building the first house. I said, now, who are you blokes again? I said, we're builders.
Beautiful story.
We're builders. It was really good.
Look, Chris, and
one of the guys said...
Sorry, continue, sorry.
Yep.
Oh, that's
one of the guys said, look, I'm going to keep doing this until I get my gold card. Then I'm going to apprentice my niece, my nephews, and all the boys in the family to me. We're going to start a building company. And I said, yes, that's exactly what I want to hear.
Yeah, look, Chris, not too much on a tangent, but this has been a great conversation to lead, and part of the reason why we believe there should be another state for Central and North Queensland, mate. If it's not for the simple purposes of the political will to be able to get things like the Burdekin Dam invested in adequately, or all the other dams that are possibly shovel ready or just need that 10-year period of, the planning and planning works done on what could be a potential dam done. If it's not sorry,
yes, it is.
Yeah, go.
Well, I agree. I agree with you entirely. Now, what it needs is the centre of things in Queensland is in Brisbane. That's 1,480 kilometres away.
Well, of course, yes.
Now, the thinking in George Street in Brisbane gets diluted more and more and more the further away from the centre of Brisbane that you get. By the time you get up the Cape or up the Gulf or out to Western Queensland, it's been diluted to such a point that it's non-existent.
Well, that's the point, is because if they can't even adequately finance a thing like the Burdekin Dam upgrade, or actually get the funds ready for projects like other dams, like the highway upgrades, how do we think that they're ever going to solve an issue like an Aboriginal community like Arakoon having a percentage, like having their population feel a sense of hopelessness and never actually having the ability to solve those problems? Because in a new state, we not only would we have the political will to actually get things like dams built, get things like highways upgraded, but the social implications of having the representation to what would then have the highest percentage of population of Aboriginal and Indigenous people, and it would include the Torres Strait, would actually have the best opportunity of solving these issues by giving them the opportunities and prosperity through things like the agricultural boom that would happen through a dam up in the Cape, because the Mitchell catchment has huge potential. But it's not just about that. Right. This is the secondary and third flow-on effects of this fact that not only will they have their presence and their voice heard in a parliament, and not be coddled to from a far-off parliament in Brisbane, but the economic opportunity would be there, and then the will to solve their social issues. Both would coincide, and it would be a huge success for their Aboriginal communities, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
A friend of mine down in the Burdekin, he's the biggest rice grower down there, Alan Milan, and Alan made the interesting comment one day. He said, it's not just all about me growing rice. He said he was down at the rice mill the other day, and he said there were, I think, 16 men employed there. And he thought, if I wasn't growing rice, these men wouldn't be employed. And that's what I'm talking about. When I'm talking the economy, it spreads out. It's not just about what's being produced on the farm, or it is about what's being produced on the farm, but it's not just what the farmer ends. I think a lot of people think that the farmer ends up hanging on to the whole lot. Out of that $5,000 per hectare, out of that $5,000 per hectare with cotton, he only ends up keeping about $1,500 if he's lucky.
Yeah. If I can just jump in there.
Yeah, Bill, did you have something to say?
The rest of it gets.
Well, I mean, people keep going on about this thing about distance. It has got nothing to do with distance. It's about mindset and what their wants and needs are versus ours. I mean, it's not as though they're just 1,600 miles or 1,600 kilometres south from us in Cairns. They're actually in another universe. What they deem as how the world should look and how Central and North Queensland should look for them is completely different. What we need to be a vital community and wealth producing community. Their vision or their universe, they look at it as just a space of land and basically, I think their preference is that it's just a wild piece of thing and there's no humans in it whatsoever.
Yes,
so
that's exactly right.
It's got nothing to do with distance. I mean, the whole point is, if you just cut out the southeast corner, the people in Bundaberg have a lot of similarities with the people in Burketown. The people in Monto have a lot of similarities with the people in Mareeba, but they have nothing to do with the people in Brisbane and the way they think. So that's the problem. It's their view of the world that's the problem. We need to extract ourselves out and get away from their view of the world and how we should operate, and operate in our own real world under our own parliament. So that's the biggest problem. It's not distance. It's simply their mindset and what they believe from their theories on how the economy should run, how industry should run, how the environment should run, versus how we need it to run to actually create wealth. And I think that's the big difference. But if we could just move back to
a lot of people in Brisbane have no idea where the wealth in the state is actually, the revenue is actually generated.
Exactly.
They think that they're the ones generating it, but they're not. They're 2 and 3 and 4 sort of levels or quantum leaps away from the source of the wealth. The source of the wealth is
their money is recycled money.
Exactly.
Yes, they're handling the products, the inputs and the outputs from agriculture and mining.
Well,
if we just go back to the water, when in this election we've had a bit of buttering up of the Central and North Queensland public in regards to both the Liberal and Labor sort of making overtures about the Bradfield scheme, and then you've got the competing project, which is the favourite of the Catters, is Hell's Gates. And my understanding from the Bradford scheme, if you go back to its original concept, it was nothing to do with benefiting North Queensland. The idea was to get water from North Queensland and get it south as far and fast as possible for their benefit. So in the scheme of things, a Bradfield scheme, do you think it is a benefit really to North Queensland? Like, I can't see it being any good to Cairns. I doubt it would be much good to the people of Townsville. And
well, you don't need water up in Cairns, so you get enough coming out of the sky to keep it going.
Oh, well, we need the storage capacity. Like, they keep talking about, we want to increase the population. But I tell you what, we get to water restrictions pretty quick when there's a bit of a lag between the wet season, as I tell you. So it's like Townsville. It's a stupid situation. Here we are in the 21st century, and we're really dependent from time to time on the rainfall. Now, and the councils have to worry about it. You tell me if the Logan Council or the Gold Coast Council has to worry about water supply in southeast Queensland. I mean, their only thing is to make sure it's distributed and collect the water rates. That's about it. But as for storage, and that's completely the responsibility of the state government through, is it the southeast water down there or whatever it is. And up here, we seem to be stuck with a lot of the problems. But can you just sort of give us a bit of insight of the different projects and their competition, sort of like the Bradfield scheme versus Hell's Gate versus the Vertican, and how?
Well, I'll tell you a big. Don't quote me on this.
We just had a contribution from one of the listeners as well, saying that Tinaroo is actually now all allocated. So another dam actually needs to be created for more available water, I think.
Yeah, well, I've got the dam for you.
Oh, so here we go. Yep.
The Bradfield scheme won't work unless there's a dam put on the Herbert River, and water from the Herbert is shunted into the upper Burdekin into the Hell's Gate Dam, and then I'd prefer to say it piped, but channeled or piped the modified Bradfield scheme would only take water to the western plains, basically, of Queensland, the Richmond, Huon and Richmond Downs, and the Aramac Plain. That's as far as the water would get, as far as I'm concerned. All this rubbish about piping it to New South Wales, well, yeah, maybe they should move here.
and what's the sort of the figures like? What's the cost and readiness of the Burdekin versus Hell's Gate versus Bradfield sort of thing?
The Burdekin Dam, the Burdekin finishing the Burdekin Dam will probably cost about between 1.1 and 1.5 billion, depending upon what needs to be done. But the main thing that needs to be done is purely the 14.6 metre floodgates and the concreting to support it, and also some remedial work, probably about 300 million, I think, on the saddle dams, just to bring them up to par. That means just sort of strengthening them a bit. That's about all. But
I believe there's no environmental hold-ups with that. It's actually everything
none at all. The land is already owned. Yeah, the land's already owned, and has been leased back to graziers around the dam. So the land is owned. You don't have to buy any land. The dam itself was built to specification to have those 14.6 metre floodgates, so it doesn't require too much extra effort, basically, apart from the saddle dams, in more construction. Now, I'll tell you one great secret, basically. You've got all these people jumping on board with Hell's Gate Dam and the Bradfield scheme and everything, for one reason. They know that they're not. You notice they're not jumping on board with me with Burdekin Falls Dam, because that's only going to be about a bit over $1 billion, and that's affordable. That might actually happen. Now, if they put their mind to it, because the government put up $3.3 billion the other day for water retention here in Queensland. Now, that's the federal government. Now, the reason all these characters are jumping on board with the Bradfield scheme and the Burdekin and the Hell's Gate Dam is because they know damn well that the chances of it being built in their lifetime and yours and mine is zero. It's not going to happen.
Exactly.
And therefore they can get on board.
So they can have a
free ride. Yeah, no cost at all. They can have a free ride, pretending that they're out there with a huge vision, making vast things happen. When in actual fact, they know damn well they're not going to have to do anything at all.
It's an empty promise, and it's election time. What do you expect, I suppose? And listen,
that's right.
$1 billion.
It's a bit like the.
Sorry, Chris, go.
Yeah, it's a bit like the Bruce Highway. We've been promised that every year for 50 years.
Exactly. Another reason for a new state, and that's the point I was about to make, is when you see the disparity of electorates and how they're placed around the state and the concentration of them around the CBD. And I mean, we even touched on the fact that, we're starting to get inner city electorates going to that green tendency, and, that's their prerogative, that's fine. But when you see that the wealth generated in the state is a vast array of things that those sort of political ideals are against, it's all the more reason that those of us that understand its importance should say, years have got to stop. Fine, that's if you want to start thinking like that, here's a line. Now make your economy work without affecting the rest of us in the state. What would then become a new state. But then you also see the way that the political game is played when it comes to a thing like the building of the Cross River Rail and the allocation of funds to be able to move people in the southeast corner comes up freely. Not a problem. $8-10 billion to Stewart. But the $1 billion required to make the Burdekin Falls 14 metres higher and have huge economic potential for the whole of the region, that's not important. There's not many voters in the Burdekin area, or many electorates, I should say. Yeah. But I guess that's the point. How do you guys live in the fact that this would make huge economic potential happen and make more revenue for greater infrastructure spending?
Don't worry. We are up here. We're totally aware that the $5 billion for the Cross River Rail The only reason we can see for its or purpose for its existence at all is it's going to get the people in South Brisbane and in West End, it's going to get them home 10 minutes early than they do now.
Yep.
That's all it'll do. That's all that it will do. It'll get them home 10 minutes earlier.
Same with the building of a second
And
M1.
for $5 billion. For $5 billion. That's a hell of a lot of money to spend on that's, how many, that's $500 million a minute.
Yep.
But the worst thing about that is when you think about it, like with the train movements in Brisbane, the taxpayer actually has to subsidise each fare by approximately $11. So for every trip a person or any number of people take, the taxpayer is subsidising that system at $11 a hit. So it's not just the upfront cost of the $6 billion.
It's an ongoing
cost. Ongoing cost forever and ever. The taxpayers got to subsidise these journeys. I mean, fair enough. Yes, we pay for public transport and that to a degree, but when it's getting up to that sort of level, it's beyond beggars belief. And the other thing is, this government, governments over the last 20 years have accrued a debt now over $100 billion in southeast Queensland, in Brisbane. If we have a separate state and walk away, we walk away with zero debt. We do not take any of that debt with us. They can keep it, and they don't get our coal royalties to pay off their credit card. And that's what a lot of people need to wake up to, is the longer we stay, the only thing we get from southeast Queensland and the Brisbane Parliament is increased debt. We've gone up in the this term of government, we've gone up from $17,000 per person to $20,000 per person public debt. And what have we got to show for it? Nothing. It's time to leave people.
We've got half-finished roads, half-finished dams. We've got a line-up of stupid legislations regarding agriculture and mining, which are just ludicrous, which just just designed to prevent revenue generation. Like this business, 3 million extra megalitres of water going straight out to sea. And I could show you here, how much you generate. We've since the dam was built 30 years ago, we've lost about 60 to 80, or probably more if you count more high-priced products, like tomatoes, capsicums, or something like that. In that Bowen area, that generates around $460 million out of vegetables every year. 460 million. Bowen.
Look.
So with more water, we produce more.
You put it on the ground and magical things happen. Unfortunately, magical things don't happen out of the Queensland government.
You get in your car and go down to Bowen and see how many, and then drive around and ask the farmers, would you, why are your paddocks empty? We couldn't plant enough tomatoes this year. Why not? Not enough water.
Too expensive.
Too expensive as well.
Not enough water.
Yeah.
Too expensive. The cost of pumping it, the cost of electricity, the cost of the water. Yep.
Well, that's Chris, I've got a question, because excuse my ignorance, especially when it comes, you're well informed when it comes to the Burdekin as well as most of the other dams that might be shovel-ready in Queensland. Is there a hydroelectricity component of the Burdekin?
Yeah, there was with the 14.6 metre floodgates, there was supposed to be, and this was part of what was going to make the dam pay and make the cost of water cheaper, was a 500 megawatt power hydro station as well on that dam.
Constantly churning,
so the irrigators
constantly making electricity. Yeah.
Yeah, for the irrigators to run the pumps.
Yeah.
Well, up your direction, the Tully Millstream project, you realise that that's half built. All the tunnels and everything are all built. And it got stopped halfway by the Greens because they couldn't stand the thought of 2,500 acres of rainforest being knocked down for expansion of the dam. That Tully Millstream hydro stream, that was going to generate 750 megawatts of hydroelectricity.
What I don't understand about the people in the cities is their hatred for water. Like, a puddle of water is a great thing. I mean, it brings so much life. I mean, yeah, all right, you've got rainforests and you put them underwater, but just having a surrounding permanent lake, freshwater lake, brings all sorts of teeming life, wildlife into the environment. It's not necessary. The storage of water is not necessarily a killer of life or nature. It's a blessing in so many. I'm sure these people, if you came up with a plan to make a complete oasis of the Simpson Desert, they would object to it.
They would.
I guess it makes me think immediately of the black-throated finch when it comes to the Adani argument. It's like it is a bird. It is a bird, and it can literally fly anywhere it wants to bloody go. And I know it might. It might be its natural habitat or environment in that general area, but it's not like they're ripping every single tree down in the acres that they would subsequently own.
And I'll tell you something. Out there, in where the Adani mine was going to be, the addition of water into the equation would have meant that there would be more finches there than ever before.
Exactly. Birds generally love the water as much as anything.
That's right.
Well, I reckon all they have to do is build a McDonald's or something and have an outdoor sitting area, and just all the sort of little brown finches and other little scavenger birds, they seem to make a great home of it. I can't imagine, where I live, when I get out to mow the lawn, I'm sort of greeted by several woolly wagtails that live in our environment, are only too happy to see me with a noisy mower, and then come flying across the grass, grabbing bits and whatever insects come off the ground to feed on. So it's strange that there's so many birds and that can adapt and suit our lifestyle and fit in with us. I just find it strange that they are all threatened by even a minor change in their environment. It seems ludicrous to me.
By the inner city people that don't experience the lives that we experience here, which is more wilderness than they'll ever experience in the concrete jungles. It's just life. The human interaction with the environment around it is not evil. It may be that we're dominant, and when we're laying a slab, a tree might never grow there again. It might be that the creation of a dam makes a little part of a forest go underwater, but they don't talk about the thousands of acres that might subsequently grow the forest next to the rivers outside of that. But it's all evil. The natural environment.
Jump back a bit. The greatest damage to the environment and threat to wildlife in Australia or in Queensland at this point is the Brisbane, Gold Coast, North Coast metropolitan zone.
Well, exactly.
That's the greatest threat to the environment at the moment.
So the destruction of their own environment warrants the locking up and lack of development of the areas that do need development. And it's an absurd train of thought, and it's part of the reason why we just need to drop the whole
because they've only got, you see, that's because over the last 30 years they've only learned social science, social English, and social maths.
Oh. And subsequently now we're left with all these social problems thanks to them. So
That's right.
Oh, well. Look, gentlemen, it's been a wonderful discussion. I just wanted to mention we're coming up to an hour. We like to try and not take too much away from your evening, Chris, or all our guests. So, Bill, was there any finishing questions you wanted to ask Chris while we've got him still for the next 5 or 10 minutes that we haven't touched on?
Not really. Like I say, my interest was in regard to the water, being water-wise in North Queensland. I mean, we're coming up with the election, and there's a lot of promises and information out there about different water things, but we really do need a sort of assessment group or something to come along after this and sort the wheat from the chaff to make sure we get the best projects in the quickest possible time and actually deliver water rather than put the ones that are only going to ever be on the never. So I think that's going to be
the best possible one you've got. The best possible one you've got on the table is the Vertical Falls Dam, raising the level, putting in the as designed floodgates, 14.6 metres high, not what the present government is talking about by raising it 2 metres. That's just to make sure. That's just to make sure we don't get the 14.6. That'll wreck it completely.
Well, and subsequently, if it's designed for the extra 14 metres, why put a Band-Aid on when keep doing these 2 metre at a time things which will only make it weaker as it goes?
Because they do not want an expansion in farming. They hate farming.
It's ludicrous.
They all have this idea that farming is destroying the environment and killing the reef. You know that fucking reef. This is French.
Continue.
Most of us can't afford to go and see the blasted thing anyway, or spare the time. And what's it there for? Japanese and Chinese tourists, basically. You ask how many people in Queensland have actually been to see the reef?
Well, it cost you $299 to go. If you're an ordinary old tourist and haven't got the means, it costs you $299 to go out there. So, you know, if you save up for it, it's a once in a lifetime experience, and you could get it, and you could get a rotten day.
Exactly, yeah.
I've been to the reef a few times. Down in the Whitsundays, but excuse me, the reef is going to become a more of a burden to us than anything else, because apparently we can't farm because of the reef, we can't mine because of the reef,
can't fish.
You can't fish because of the reef. You can't sort of blow your nose because of the blasted reef.
But here's the thing. Why are we so worried about such a temporary, short-term thing like the reef? I mean, a lot of people don't understand that the reef is only
Dr. Peter Ridd. Yeah. Dr. Peter Ridd hit the note. Here's a JCU guy who got the flick because
we're well acquainted with Peter.
JCUs. Yeah. Yeah. Well, Peter's right. Peter's absolutely correct. And he just because he's a genuine scientist with a genuine skill and capacity, a proper education, and knows what he's talking about. See, he's not towing the line. The political line is that the reef is being destroyed and mining and agriculture is doing it.
And we need more money to research it, to keep our
jobs. That's like 400 million actually.
It's just a long-term gravy chain for pseudoscience. That's
all it is.
Pseudoscience.
But you see, the money is running out. The money is running out. You keep spending. You keep sending $2 to $3 or $4 billion worth of water. That's what it's worth. Straight out to sea every year over the Vertical Falls Dam, and you'll go broke in the end.
Well, we already are. With reaching $100 billion in debt in the Queensland state, I think we already are past that point, Chris.
Well, we've got to stop being idiots and start raising some revenue.
Well, we'll do it in a new state, mate. At least we can put it. We'll do it in a new state. We can put it to far better use, I reckon.
I think we could too.
Yeah.
But, I would personally. I'd go a bit further. I'd draw a line across Australia at 25 degrees south, and I'd start a new nation. I wouldn't start a new state.
Just get rid of a lot of them, you reckon?
All that bunch of idiots, the socialist idiots in the south. Get rid of them. They can do what they want down there. Anybody down there who wants to get a life, who has a vision, who wants to do something positive for the future, come north.
I think
come north, young man.
You come your it's like the old American go west. Look, I think you'd find the greatest
Go
migration.
west, young man.
I think you'd find the greatest migration of people ever in recent mind would find themselves going south and north.
I reckon we'd get about 5 million people.
Come and live the tropical, beautiful lifestyle, and there's you can just live outdoors and enjoy the lifestyle, which the traditional Aussie lifestyle should have been.
Yeah,
and create wealth.
And create
also
wealth.
you can mine. Yeah, create wealth. You can create wealth for yourself, have a decent lifestyle where you're not living on handouts from the government. You know that your kids will be looked after. They'll have decent health, decent education,
and opportunity.
The opportunities, and the government will spend money on things that create revenue, not on idiot ideas that just blow it.
Exactly, and they've got plenty of idiot ideas. We need to get rid of the lot. Look, gentlemen.
Now you tell me. You tell me how stupid it is to spend $200 million on a stadium, football stadium in Townsville, when you haven't even got a guaranteed water supply.
Look, the mind boggles, Chris. We can only hope one day it'll boggle a little bit less. Thank you very much for your time this evening, mate. Let's wrap it up. I don't want to take too much. It is getting late in the evening. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. We really appreciate your time. It's been very insightful. I especially enjoyed your thoughts when it came to your dealings in psychology when it comes to Aboriginal men in the communities, and of course your expertise when it comes to water. It's been absolutely a pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much for sparing the time out of your busy evening.
Thank you very much. And thank you, gentlemen, for giving me the opportunity.
No, that's no worries.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you.
Listen, for those that are listening, my name is David Young signing off. If you want to learn more about the campaign to create a new state, you can visit bootbrisbane.com and learn a significant amount of information and more about how it's viable and how it can happen. And especially leading up into the state election in a couple of weeks in Queensland, learn who you should be voting for. Likewise, we have another show which works in tandem with us that operates on a different evening. That's Matt Maloney in the Northern Vibe, and you can tune in on him on Monday evenings at 6 p.m. I believe it is. You'd have to look him up on his Facebook page just to confirm that, because it's Northern Vibe, Matt Maloney, and he has other interesting guests, just like we had this evening with Chris. Likewise, you can like us on Facebook at bootbrisbane.com's Facebook page, as well as the sponsor of this show, Yes to a North Queensland State, where you can always keep up to date with the campaign of the creation of a new state and learn of interesting yet ridiculous stories, just like we heard this evening when it comes to the bureaucratic process in Central and North Queensland and how we need to be rid of it. So with that, gentlemen, again, thank you for your evening, and good night, everybody, and speak to you next week.
Good night. Thank you very much.
Good night.
Good night, David. Good night, Chris. Bye.
Good night, guys.
Good night, mate.
Good night.